friends. I'm Karen, and this is the Family Food for Moms podcast. We're talking about inspiration for family cooking and dining. Today, we're going to talk more about what we can learn from previous generations about cooking, nutritious eating, how to make healthy meals for our families. So in the past, we've talked about things like cooking from scratch, cooking at home with fresh ingredients, using local foods and seasonal produce. We've talked about eating all the parts, nose to tail, and then some traditional cooking methods, slow cooking, etc. We've talked about eating as a family and how that connection is so good and so healthy. We've talked about being balanced and not going with all the trends or diets. We've talked about recipes that have been passed down from grandparents and their simpler, healthier way of life in general. So today I want to talk about some of the less obvious things that we can learn from previous generations about cooking and nutrition. So not just what to eat, but how they thought about food and how they made it healthier, what were part of their habits that were kind of second nature to them, and that will be really helpful to us. It's been a while since I've done a 10-point episode. Some of you like that. I don't easily stick to points. I tend to have a brain that goes in all directions. But I thought for this one, we'll do 10 points to make it hopefully easier to remember. So, number 1, bitters were a regular part of the diet. So, bitters are something we don't easily eat. Perhaps we do have tea, like dandelion tea. There's radishes that some people eat in salads. But it's not really something we try to remember to do on purpose. So I think bitters are a very good addition to our meals. So any kind of bitter leaf is a good thing because it helps with digestion. It helps to stimulate bile and support liver function, also to regulates your appetite. So think of things like arugula, endive, or apple cider vinegar, a little splash in some water before a meal or before bedtime. Those are great for supporting digestion and helping with your blood sugar, things like that. So bitters as part of a diet. Then number 2, bone marrow, cooking with bones, even chewing the bones. So people in the past knew that eating marrow or the soft simmered bones like in oxtail soup was a prized nutritional item. Bone marrow is rich in minerals, in collagen, in the right kind of fats. It's basically nutritional gold. So you can dry roast a marrow bone. You can put marrow bones in soup or in stews and scrape out the marrow and just eat it in the stew or mix it into the soup. Or you can spread it on toast with some salt and pepper. It's a very nutrient-dense snack. And then cooking your meat on the bone is going to give you so much more nutrition than without. So if you're doing a roast lamb or if you're doing chicken, it's so much better to do one on the bone. And then you get those extra nutrients with your meal. Number 3, scrap cooking, cooking with your scraps or your leftovers. And this was a skill, not just something as a trend or now and then, but there were specific things they did to use up their leftovers or their scraps from peeling vegetables, meat drippings, perhaps making bone broth after they've made a roast, using up their stale bread or their wilted greens. They were used very creatively in a soup or a stew. So there was less waste, more flavor, and more nutrition that they got from their food. So what can we do? We can save vegetable scraps to use in making bone broth or making a vegetable soup. We can save bones from roasts. You can even freeze them until you're ready to use them and you've collected enough in a container in the freezer. You can use leftover carrots and things in your broth. Stale bread you can make into croutons, which are delicious, leftover sourdough. You can even use them in a cheese fondue because it tastes better with stale bread. You can make bread crumbs, put them in the blender when you've toasted them. And then wilted greens can go into soup, or they can be made into a pesto, which is delicious. So be creative and think about what will be a good way to reuse things or to use up things you'd normally throw away. Number 4, food as medicine was the norm. So they didn't just use herbs medicinally, but all kinds of things: garlic, ginger, onion, spices, herbs, vinegar. And they use these for flavor, but they also use them preventatively against illness, and then therapeutically if you were sick. Think of things like chicken soup, dandelion tea, the onion. These ingredients always help with digestion, they reduce inflammation, and they support immunity. So when you're cooking, cook with intention. Add some grated turmeric, add some garlic to help your heart, add some ginger to help with digestion. Serve with a ginger tea or a green tea. You can grow yarrow in your garden to help with injuries, or you can grow some comfrey, otherwise known as knitbone, to make poultices. You can use plantain, which is often a weed in the garden, that one with the long stripes, the veins in a long stripe on it. That can be used to make a tincture to help with stings. It's good at sucking the toxins out of something or the poison. So there's lots of plants that can be used medicinally. Then saturated fats were used. They were not demonized. They were used in moderation, not overused, but recognized for the nutritional value that they have. So people used to cook with lard or tallow from animals without guilt. They used butter from freshly milked cows and cream. They were made from good whole ingredients, not a long list like margarine full of seed oils and awful things, but the good animal fats. So these were stable for cooking. They contain the fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K, and therefore they hardly used processed oils or seed oils. They also used ghee, olive oil with intention. Then number 6, they were used to soaking or sprouting or fermenting grains and legumes. So before pressure cookers were around, or even canned beans, people used to soak their beans, and they would ferment their bread dough, they would sprout their grains. So these methods would reduce the anti-nutrients like phytic acid. They would make the nutrients that we want more available. They would aid digestion. So these are good habits to have. If you're going to cook oats, soak them overnight in the pot. Set up everything in the pot the night before, add a little apple cider vinegar, and then your oats are going to be much healthier. If you're going to use rice, then try to soak it for a couple of hours and then rinse it before cooking. And then if you're doing bread baking, sourdough gives the dough time to ferment, especially if it's overnight, and break down some of that gluten. So any type of fermentation is best. Things like kefir or kefir, making kefir from your milk. Things like lacto-fermented pickles or sauerkraut, not fermented with vinegar, but fermented on the counter naturally. These are all things our grandparents did and are very healthy for us. So maybe start with one so it's not overwhelming, and see what you can use. Often you can buy these ready-made. Things like sauerkraut and lacto-fermented pickles you can buy. At this point, I buy those things, and I haven't, well, we sometimes make sourdough, but I haven't made kefir. My friends have made kefir, and I'm still not quite there yet. We love to buy lacto-fermented pickles, things like olives, kefir we'll buy. So it's a blessing that we can find these things in a grocery store these days. So any of these sour things are very good for us in the same way as the bitters are. They help with digestion and they help with the gut health, all those things, immunity. Also, salt was used to preserve things like pickles, meats, and fish before refrigeration. So that was like a natural fermentation using the salt, which creates the probiotics and it preserves the nutrients. So in the same way as you'd make a jar of pickles, you would add a brine, which is the salt, and then the water, and maybe some other things like garlic, and then you leave that to ferment. Things like salt preserved lemons, kimchi, cured meats. Number 7. Wild and foraged foods were commonly used. People gathered wild greens for medicinal use, especially berries. If you've ever made an elderberry syrup for helping with your children's health, immunity when they have a cold. Wild mushrooms, things like truffles, seasonal herbs, rosemary, oregano, thyme. So if you pick something and use it straight away, it's going to be more nutrient dense than if it's packaged from the grocery store. Obviously, you need to know what you're looking for and what you're picking, and not poison yourself with mushrooms. But you could even start at a farmer's market. It's going to be fresher and it's going to be wild grown, not sprayed with pesticides. Hopefully, it'll be pesticide free from the farmer's market. But whatever you can do in your garden is fabulous. Or having a kitchen herb garden with some of your favorites that are right at your fingertips when you're cooking adds amazing flavor and adds great nutrients to your food. Things like basil, thyme, rosemary, oregano, whatever herbs you enjoy. It's not as easy these days to have access to things like mushrooms and truffles in the wild, but whatever you can find, use that. Number 8, desserts were often fruit-based, similar to the French. They used minimal sweetener in it, so treats were things like baked apples, stewed rhubarb or berry pie, berry compotes, and sometimes sweetened with honey or dried fruit or nothing at all. So sugar consumption was definitely lower and natural flavors were encouraged. Try stewing apples or pears with spices or blending up some bananas with cocoa powder and freezing that for a whole food dessert. See if you can get your creative juices flowing. You can take some berries and stir them up until they're a jam-like texture. Let the water evaporate a little bit and then have that over pancakes. Think about what natural whole ingredients there are, like the fresh fruit with whipped cream over the top or pouring cream, berries and cream, peaches and cream. Those are all delicious. Number 9, some people call it a porridge culture. This existed in many cultures and countries where grains like oats or cornmeal or millet, rice, buckwheat were used to make a slow cooked porridge. Sometimes it was savory and sometimes it was sweet. Things like polenta, similar to the cornmeal, they could set into squares to have with a lunch, with a soup or stew. Or there was a sweet porridge to have for breakfast. So they were cooked slowly after being soaked, so they're easier to digest and more filling. And this was a cheap and healthy and a filling breakfast. So savory oats with some toppings like fruit, bananas, strawberries, maybe some raw milk in there, millet porridge with cinnamon and nuts, and then things like rice puddings or bread pudding. All of those things were enjoyed because they used starches in the correct way, preparing them well for easy digestion, but then they were also using up leftovers and, making a nutritious, delicious breakfast or dessert or side for a lunch. Then number 10, lastly, animal fats were collected and reused. So they didn't just use lard and tallow, etc., but they would keep them and reuse them. So drippings from bacon when it was cooked or from chicken was used to make bone broth and then used in a stew. The drippings would be used to cook some vegetables in or anything that they could use for flavor and as a fat to cook in. So something that was stable at a high heat, then they would save it. So saving bacon grease to cook your meat in, to roast your vegetables in, adds to the flavor. You can cook eggs in bacon fat and give it a delicious flavor and add nutrients. I love using coconut oil, but of course you didn't get that long ago. So it can be toxic to reheat seed oils, but animal fats are pretty stable and things like tallow can be reused. So you take the tallow and you cook your vegetables in it and then you drain it again, because then it's got the extra flavor of your seasonings and your vegetables. And then the second time you use it, it's going to bring even more flavor to your food. And then you can judge when it seems like it's been overused and when it's okay to still use it again. But it obviously saves money to do that as well. So, just 10 tips of things that they may have done many generations ago and that we can learn from. I hope there's something that inspired you in there. Happy cooking, and I'll see you next time.